Welcome, the Lord's chosen. When the watchers start to watch the watched, the script flips and the observer becomes the observed. They thought they were studying you, tracking your every move, decoding your motives, trying to figure out how someone could walk through storms without flinching. What they didn't realize is that while they were watching, you were evolving. Every silent test became data, not for them, but for your destiny. You moved like someone who'd already read the ending of the story, calm while they scrambled for spoilers. Top-level agents, energy observers, silent analysts, call them whatever you want, they've all had one thing in common: fascination. Because you didn't respond the way normal people do. They threw noise and you stayed still. They sent confusion and you turned it into clarity. Somewhere between curiosity and disbelief, they started taking notes. And here's the funny part. They came to expose you, but ended up respecting you. You became a living case study they can't categorize. They can track your location, but not your elevation. They can monitor your habits, but not your heart. That's when it hit them. They weren't the ones in control anymore. You were. Now the same ones who thought they were testing you want to thank you in person. Because in their silent surveillance, they stumbled upon something rarer than information: transformation. Welcome to the reality where the chosen one becomes the teacher, and even the watchers can't help but take notes. Number one, you weren't being spied on, you were being studied. They weren't just watching your life unfold like a movie. They were analyzing every frame, every reaction, every silence. At first you might have thought it was paranoia or just coincidence, the way certain people suddenly paid attention, how some situations felt orchestrated, how your calm seemed to make others nervous. But what was really happening went deeper than surveillance. You became an experiment in human endurance, integrity, and truth. They wanted to see how far authenticity could go before it breaks. They wanted to know what happens when someone refuses to sell their soul for approval, refuses to fake kindness for access, and refuses to conform just to fit in. You became the live test subject for resilience in a world addicted to fakery. And while they thought they were the scientists in control of the process, you were quietly rewriting the formula. Every time you stayed composed when provoked, you disrupted their prediction models. When you chose kindness over chaos, they had to recheck their data. When you didn't collapse under pressure, their systems glitched because you didn't fit the behavioral patterns they'd built to understand people. You didn't react like a puppet. You responded like a creator, and that changed everything. You see, they weren't studying your weakness. They were studying your strength. They wanted to understand the mechanism of faith, the structure of inner peace, the psychology of someone who doesn't bend to manipulation. But there's no algorithm for soul. There's no blueprint for conviction. What they discovered, though they'll never admit it out loud, is that your power doesn't come from external validation. It comes from alignment with something untouchable. So while they thought they were gathering intel, you were teaching them without words. You became the thesis they can't publish, the mystery they can't solve, and the quiet reminder that true control doesn't come from watching others. It comes from mastering yourself. Number two, you operate from principles. They can't manipulate. You don't run on the same software as the rest. Most people can be swayed. A little praise here, a little fear there, and they'll adjust their behavior to please whoever holds the power. But you don't move like that. Your decisions come from something solid inside you, a code of truth that doesn't rewrite itself to fit in with the trends or the expectations of others. That's what makes you unpredictable to them. You can't be bribed by attention, guilted by silence, or tricked into betraying yourself. They tried everything. They tested your patience, tempted your ego, and waited for you to crack. But what they found was unsettling. You weren't powered by the need to belong. You were powered by alignment, by what feels right, not what looks right. They realize that manipulation only works on those who need something from the manipulator. You don't. You've learned to stand alone, and that's a level of freedom few ever reach. This is where their control fails. They operate in systems built on fear, hierarchy, and compliance. You operate on self-awareness, discipline, and faith. They follow orders. You follow truth. And while that might make you a threat in their eyes, it also makes you rare. Because every world built on control eventually needs a reminder of what real power looks like. They can't decode you because your motives aren't rooted in greed or attention. You move with quiet purpose, not performance. You know how to walk away when the price of staying means losing your peace. You're not driven by applause, you're driven by alignment, and that's something their systems can't track or replicate. So they watch, confused but captivated. They realize they can't bend you because you don't operate on their frequency. You don't respond to fear, you respond to purpose. And that makes you the kind of person they can't manage, can't predict, and can't replace. Number 3, your consistency exposed their pretenses. They built entire identities around control, image, and perception. But you never joined the act. While they shifted with every trend and adapted to every new audience, you stayed rooted. You didn't need to perform to prove your worth. That steady nature of yours, the ability to remain the same in public and in private, quietly exposed everyone who was faking stability. Consistency became your quiet rebellion. It revealed who was pretending and who was truly grounded. They couldn't understand how you remained calm when chaos was expected, how you stayed kind when bitterness was trending, how you kept showing up when they were sure you'd give up. Your actions became a mirror that showed them their own inconsistency. They realized they were loyal only when it was convenient, kind only when it was visible, and confident only when supported. You became a living audit of authenticity. Your steadiness stripped away illusions. People who once mocked your simplicity began to feel uneasy around it because it reminded them of how far they drifted from their own truth. You didn't preach, you lived. And that quiet, repetitive integrity made louder noise than their loud performances. They couldn't copy it because consistency doesn't come from habit. It comes from heart. The longer they observed, the more they saw the cracks in their own masks. They had charisma but no conviction, influence but no intention, confidence but no center. You didn't have to point it out. Your consistency did it for you. It revealed that real strength isn't in being flashy. It's in being reliable when no one's watching. That's why your presence unsettled them. It wasn't that you tried to expose anyone. You simply refused to pretend. Your steadiness became proof that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Over time, they stopped trying to test you and started trying to understand you. Because when the noise faded, it was your consistency that still stood. Solid, clear, and undeniable. Number 4, they expected rebellion. You chose refinement. They were ready for chaos. They expected the loud reaction, the emotional outburst, the moment you'd lose control and prove their suspicions right. They set the stage for conflict, hoping to drag you into a power struggle where they'd have the upper hand. But instead of breaking, you refined. Instead of arguing, you evolved. That's what threw them off balance. Not your resistance, but your restraint. You didn't fight their energy, you purified yours. They're trained to win through disruption. They know how to drain people's focus by keeping them reactive. But when you chose calm over chaos, you cut off their supply. You didn't give them the satisfaction of watching you unravel. You turned every attack into discipline, every insult into awareness, every setback into focus. While they operated on provocation, you mastered transformation. That's the move they never saw coming. What unnerved them wasn't your silence. It was your stability. You didn't argue for your worth. You embodied it. You didn't chase validation. You let your growth speak. Every attempt to pull you into conflict failed because your frequency had outgrown theirs. They realized they couldn't manipulate someone who'd made peace their weapon. Your calm became unpredictable. Your focus became frightening. You weren't reacting anymore. You were responding with precision. And that's what made you powerful. You didn't just control your emotions. You redesigned them into clarity. You refused to play the villain or the victim. You became the master. They expected rebellion because that's what they understand. But refinement? That's evolution. And nothing terrifies control-based systems more than someone who transforms pain into discipline. They learned that your silence wasn't surrender, it was sovereignty. You weren't avoiding the fight. You were mastering yourself until the fight no longer mattered. And in doing that, you won in a way rebellion never could. Number 5, you broke the algorithm without trying. They had you mapped out. Every behavior, every response, every emotional cue was measured and predicted. Their system was built to anticipate reactions, to calculate your next move based on fear, temptation, or fatigue. But you didn't follow the code. You didn't fit their psychological programming. When most people would have cracked, you got clearer. When they expected compliance, you chose stillness. When they anticipated a breakdown, you had a breakthrough. You became the exception that made their entire model glitch. Their systems depend on predictability, the human tendency to repeat patterns under pressure. But your growth didn't follow logic, it followed purpose. Instead of collapsing, you adapted. Instead of reacting emotionally, you recalibrated spiritually. They couldn't quantify that. Their data said one thing, but your evolution said another. It confused them, not because they couldn't see your steps, but because they couldn't decode your rhythm. You weren't moving out of fear or impulse. You were moving from awareness. The moment they realized they couldn't predict you, they started to respect you. You became what every system quietly fears, an unprogrammable mind. They could track your movements, but not your motives. They could monitor your surroundings, but not your state of being. You were walking proof that intuition outruns algorithms, that consciousness disrupts control. You didn't break the system by fighting it. You broke it by outgrowing it. You stopped operating on reaction and started functioning on alignment. That's why their manipulation failed. You weren't rebelling, you were transcending. Your evolution wasn't loud. It was subtle, steady, and unstoppable. In a world addicted to control, your unpredictability became revolutionary. They learned that no matter how advanced their systems become, they can't calculate someone who listens to their higher self. You broke the algorithm not because you tried, but because truth can't be programmed. Number 6, you became the mirror of their hidden weakness. They came to observe you, to analyze your behavior, to measure your reactions. But the longer they watched, the more uncomfortable they became, because somewhere in that quiet observation, something unexpected happened. They began to see themselves. Your steadiness reflected their instability. Your humility highlighted their arrogance. Your peace made their restlessness impossible to ignore. You didn't have to point fingers or call them out. Your presence alone revealed the gap between who they pretended to be and who they really were. Powerful people don't fear opposition. They fear reflection. You weren't fighting them, yet your existence confronted them more deeply than any argument ever could. They wore titles, badges, and confidence like armor, but your calm stripped it all down to the truth. They were exhausted from keeping up appearances. They were strong only as long as no one reminded them how fragile their identity really was. And watching you, someone untitled, unbothered, and unshaken, became that reminder. You didn't expose their weakness with anger. You revealed it with authenticity. You didn't humiliate them, you humbled them. The more they tried to measure your strength, the more they had to confront their own emptiness. Every decision you made from peace reflected how much of theirs was built on pressure. Every time you showed grace instead of revenge, it reminded them how easily they lose control. You became the mirror that wouldn't lie. Over time, the same people who came to study you started to change, not because you forced them to, but because truth, when quietly reflected, demands self-awareness. You didn't defeat them, you disarmed them. You didn't weaken them, you revealed where they were already weak. And that's the power of being a mirror. You don't have to attack darkness. You just have to stand in light long enough for it to see itself clearly. Number 7, your vibration became classified data. They've always believed power lived in information, in data, analytics, and control. They thought intelligence was about what you could record, store, or manipulate. But then you came along, operating on something they couldn't document. You didn't dominate rooms with credentials or strategies. You shifted them with energy. Your presence carried a frequency that couldn't be logged or explained, and that unsettled them. You didn't just speak, you resonated. You didn't just think, you vibrated. And soon they realized they weren't dealing with intellect alone. They were dealing with vibration. They started to notice how people felt calmer around you, how chaos seemed to lose its power in your space, how truth felt heavier when you spoke it. That's when they began studying not your words but your energy field. You became a walking signal they couldn't decode, someone whose influence didn't rely on authority but alignment. They started to treat your calm like technology, as if it were a form of frequency control. What they didn't understand is that what they call energy manipulation, you call self-mastery. The irony is that they tried to quantify what you embody naturally. They use sensors, studies, and behavioral models to understand how vibration affects human interaction. But you'd already mastered that through awareness, stillness, and intention. You've learned that energy responds to integrity faster than it does to intellect. That's something no device can replicate. Your vibration became classified, not because it's a secret, but because it can't be owned. They can study it, copy it, or try to contain it, but they'll never reproduce it. It's the byproduct of spiritual calibration, not scientific discovery. You became the reminder that while information can be stored, true energy can only be felt. And that's why they keep watching, because deep down, they know the future doesn't belong to those who collect data. It belongs to those who command frequency. Number 8, you proved that purity is power. In a world where deception is the default language, your sincerity became revolutionary. People are trained to twist, disguise, and perform, to say what sells, to do what pleases, to chase advantage at any cost. But you didn't play that game. You stayed real when everyone else was acting. And that's what turned heads. They couldn't understand how honesty could survive in a system built on manipulation. Yet you didn't just survive, you thrived. They expected purity to be weakness. To them, kindness meant naivety, and integrity meant vulnerability. But you flipped that belief upside down. You showed that purity isn't about being soft, it's about being untouchable. When your motives are clean, no one can trap you. When your intentions are pure, manipulation has no entry point. They couldn't bribe you because you weren't for sale. They couldn't shame you because you didn't live in pretense. And that made you more powerful than they ever imagined. In a world where everyone's playing angles, your straightforwardness became impossible to predict. You didn't need to calculate your next move. Your truth guided you. And that made you efficient, sharp, and unstoppable. They realized that purity doesn't make you naive. It makes you dangerous to those who rely on deception. It strips away confusion and reveals what's real, fast. They began to notice how your presence disarmed lies, how your energy made dishonesty uncomfortable. You didn't have to expose anyone. Your authenticity did it naturally. And that's when they understood. What they'd spent years trying to simulate through control and coding, you had naturally through alignment. Purity became your hidden strength, not because it looked powerful, but because it couldn't be copied. It's easy to fake charisma, impossible to fake character. You proved that in a corrupt system, the rarest resource isn't money, status, or access. It's a clean heart that can't be bought. And that's what makes. Number 9, they realized control can't outrank consciousness. They were taught that authority equals power, that titles, ranks, and systems could bend the world to their will. They operated through command and compliance, believing that control over others was the highest form of strength. But then they met someone they couldn't intimidate, manipulate, or outsmart. Someone whose awareness ran deeper than their hierarchy. That someone was you. You didn't challenge their power. You outgrew it. They tried to use the same tactics that work on everyone else. Fear, confusion, flattery, distraction. None of it landed. You saw through every layer before they even finished their move. Because when your mind is awake, control loses its grip. Awareness sees the trap before it's set. It doesn't need to fight for freedom. It knows it's already free. And that's what they couldn't process. Your strength wasn't external. It wasn't based on position or permission. It was internal, grounded, and self-governing. The more they watched you, the more they realized how fragile their power truly was. Their authority depended on others staying asleep, following rules without question. But you operated from consciousness, not conditioning. You didn't need approval to act right or an audience to do right. You were led by clarity, not control. That's the kind of freedom that breaks systems quietly, from the inside out. What stunned them most was how you stayed calm in situations designed to provoke. You didn't resist them. You rendered them irrelevant. They learned that awareness doesn't fight control. It dissolves it. When you're conscious, manipulation has nowhere to hide. You see every move for what it is, and that alone dismantles its power. So now they understand. No badge, no uniform, no title can grant what awareness gives effortlessly, the ability to stay unshaken in a world built on illusion. You became proof that true leadership isn't about control. It's about consciousness. And that's a power no system can outrank. Number 10, you didn't need their validation. You became their revelation. You weren't chasing anyone's approval. You weren't trying to fit into their system or prove your worth to their structure. You were simply being, honest, grounded, real. But that alone disrupted everything. They'd built their world on perception, not truth, on hierarchy, procedure, and image. So when you showed up as yourself, without pretense, without agenda, it threw their entire framework into question. They were trained to believe that only recognition gives value. You became the evidence that value doesn't need recognition at all. Your quiet confidence challenged their idea of success. You didn't beg to be seen, yet everyone noticed you. You didn't push for influence, yet your presence shifted the atmosphere. And while they sought validation from ranks, metrics, and followers, you were fueled by something far simpler: purpose. That's what made them pause. Because deep down, they knew that no matter how high they climbed, they'd built it on approval, not alignment. Your authenticity did something rules never could. It awakened awareness. You became a silent mirror reflecting what they'd lost in their pursuit of power, their humanity, their sincerity, their center. They watched you move through challenges with grace instead of manipulation, and it confronted them in ways authority never could. You didn't preach change, you embodied it. You didn't expose their flaws. Your truth simply made falseness look exhausting. Over time, they stopped watching to judge and started watching to learn. You became their unspoken teacher, the proof that genuine presence carries more influence than any performance ever could. You weren't trying to make a statement, yet your life made one anyway. Validation is temporary, but revelation is eternal. You didn't need their applause because your existence itself was the message. That power doesn't come from being approved by others. It comes from being aligned with truth so deeply that even those who once monitored you end up awakened by your example. Number 11. They learned that the real elite moves in silence of integrity. They used to think power was about visibility. Who's seen, who's praised, who gets the spotlight. To them, success was measured in noise, wealth, and followers. But watching you dismantled that illusion. You weren't chasing attention, yet your influence reached deeper. You weren't competing for position, yet your presence carried authority. They began to see that true elite status isn't about status at all. It's about substance. You weren't loud, but your integrity spoke volumes. They realized the difference between image and essence. Most people they knew could perform excellence, but you embodied it. You didn't advertise your principles, you lived them. When others bent their morals for gain, you stayed anchored to truth. That quiet consistency became your signature, and it exposed how fragile their idea of power really was. They had prestige, but you had peace. They had privilege, but you had purpose. And the more they observed, the more they understood which one actually mattered. Integrity doesn't need a stage. It builds its own gravity. That's why people are drawn to those who don't boast, because authenticity has a vibration that can't be faked. You weren't loud because you didn't need to convince anyone. You moved with clarity, not performance. Your silence wasn't emptiness. It was discipline. And that quiet restraint became the loudest statement of all. Eventually, they began to envy your calm. Their power depended on perception. Yours depended on truth. They were exhausted trying to look strong, while you simply were. You became the living reminder that real wealth isn't in what's owned, but in what can't be bought. Peace, integrity, alignment. So they learned the hard truth. The real elite aren't the ones flaunting access and influence. They're the ones who walk humbly, carry clean intentions, and don't need to announce their worth. You reminded them that status without soul is just a dressed-up form of emptiness, and integrity, quietly kept, is the highest form of royalty. Number 12. You made observation turn into admiration. They came to study you, expecting patterns they could predict, behaviors they could categorize, weaknesses they could exploit. At first it was curiosity, the kind that watches quietly from the shadows, measuring every reaction. But then something shifted. The more they observed, the less they understood. Your actions didn't fit their expectations. Your calmness in the storm, your refusal to perform for attention, your ability to act from principle rather than impulse. It threw them off balance. Confusion replaced curiosity, and as their confusion deepened, admiration quietly took root. They began to see strength where they had anticipated weakness, mastery where they had expected mistakes, and resilience where they thought there would be surrender. Every move you made carried a weight that wasn't loud, but impossible to ignore. The more they tried to decode you, the more they realized that what they were witnessing couldn't be forced or replicated. You didn't have to prove anything. You didn't respond with spectacle or defiance. You simply existed with precision and intention. And in doing so, you became a benchmark they couldn't reach. Your presence became a lesson in endurance, a demonstration of how unwavering focus and integrity can outperform every strategy they've ever learned. They started to respect what they once analyzed. Slowly, the watchers became students, and their scrutiny turned into recognition. The person they tried to categorize, the one they thought they could manipulate or test, became a symbol of something far greater than their authority: resilience. They realized that strength isn't always loud and influence doesn't require dominance. By simply being yourself, you turned their observation into admiration. You transformed scrutiny into recognition. And in doing so, you proved that authenticity carries a power that even the most trained eyes cannot ignore. You weren't just seen, you were respected, and that respect could never be taken away. Number 13, you shifted from target to template. In the beginning, you were the experiment. They watched you like an anomaly, a case study in endurance, faith, and self-control. Every decision, every setback, every comeback was dissected and analyzed. They wanted to find the flaw in your armor, the crack in your peace, the weakness behind your strength. But as time passed, something unexpected happened. Instead of finding errors to exploit, they found a pattern worth emulating. What started as surveillance turned into study, and what began as scrutiny evolved into silent respect. They realized your life wasn't about luck or coincidence. It was built on discipline, perspective, and purpose. You weren't just surviving the pressure, you were transforming through it. You didn't use pain as an excuse, you used it as fuel. That's when it clicked for them. The very traits they once saw as threats were actually blueprints for power. They stopped trying to expose you and started trying to understand you. You became the reference point for something they couldn't engineer: unshakable peace. They began documenting your mindset, the way you moved with patience instead of panic, how you led without controlling, and how you stayed kind without being naive. They couldn't quantify it, but they could feel it. They watched how your stability influenced others, how your detachment brought clarity, and how your authenticity drew loyalty without effort. You became the model they didn't know they needed, proof that true influence doesn't come from manipulation, but mastery. Without realizing it, you became the new template. They once targeted you to break your code, but now they're using your life as the code. Your example quietly redefined success for them, not in power, but in peace, not in dominance, but in discipline. You became the manual they can't publish, because it wasn't written with strategy. It was written through experience, integrity, and evolution. You went from being their project to being their prototype. Number 14, you won without playing their game. They tried to draw you into their system, a maze of manipulation, competition, and control. Everything they do is built on strategy: provoke, predict, and dominate. They assumed you'd play along, that you'd fight for validation or scramble for power like everyone else. But you didn't. You stepped completely out of the arena they built and operated from a place they couldn't access: purpose. While they moved from ego, you moved from essence. They were busy calculating their next move while you were aligning with your next evolution. Their entire structure depends on reaction. They feed off people trying to prove something, off energy wasted in rivalry and revenge. But you didn't bite. You didn't fight their way. You stayed focused on what couldn't be taken: your peace, your clarity, your growth. Every time they tried to bait you into conflict, you responded with stillness. Every time they tried to confuse you, you responded with simplicity. They wanted to compete. You chose to create. And that's how you started winning without even trying to win. In their world, victory means control. But in yours, it means freedom. You didn't need their stage to shine. You built your own. You didn't need their recognition to feel validated. Your fulfillment came from within. While they were obsessed with outcomes, you mastered alignment. And that's when they realized you'd flipped the script completely. You weren't part of their game because you had outgrown the need to play. The moment they saw you move forward, untouched by their tactics, they understood something their systems never taught them, that the highest form of power is peace. You didn't defeat them by destroying them. You defeated the entire structure by refusing to operate on its terms. You showed that spirit beats strategy and purpose outlasts protocol. You didn't just win, you redefined the meaning of victory itself. Conclusion. In a world designed to test, manipulate, and control, you didn't just survive, you transformed. Every watchful eye, every calculated move against you, every expectation set to break you, became the canvas for your mastery. You moved with purpose when they moved with protocol. You stayed aligned when they chased control. You became the calm in the storm, the mirror of truth, the living proof that authenticity, integrity, and awareness outrank strategy, rank, and manipulation. You weren't loud, and you didn't need to be. Your consistency spoke where words would fail. Your energy shifted rooms in ways no algorithm could measure. Your purity became a weapon they couldn't imitate. You proved that true power doesn't require approval, that influence doesn't demand attention, and that winning doesn't need their rules. The watchers became learners. The testers became admirers. The target became the template. You didn't just survive the system. You rewrote the meaning of strength, resilience, and victory itself. Now, the world isn't just observing you. It's learning from you. You've shown that mastery isn't about what they can see, but what you cultivate within. Every point of tension they threw your way became fuel for your evolution. Every expectation they placed upon you became a stepping stone to a higher reality. And in the end, you didn't just prove them wrong. You proved what it truly means to rise above, to transcend, and to become the standard that others quietly aspire to. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any awakening insights. Like, comment, and share this video to spread the message, because real power isn't just personal, it's contagious. Your journey inspires others, and together we rise beyond limits. Stay blessed always.